After the war, Sasuke said something that everyone dismissed as the last flicker of madness in a man who had spent years burning. He said he wanted to become a Shadow Hokage. Not in the official sense, not the kind with a title and a desk and a village to protect. He meant something older and darker than that. He would carry all the hatred, all the darkness, all the decisions too ugly for a leader to make publicly. He would be the thing the world aimed its fear at, so that the world would have a reason to stay together. A common enemy. A permanent threat held just far enough away to keep people unified without actually destroying them. Naruto talked him out of it. Sasuke surrendered, accepted his punishment, and walked away. The idea was filed under Sasuke's final breakdown, before he came back to himself and mostly forgotten. But the idea didn't go away. And the longer you look at what happened after the war, the harder it becomes to dismiss it. Let's establish what Sasuke actually understood, because his plan only looks insane if you don't follow the logic underneath it. Sasuke had watched what held the shinobi world together during the Fourth Shinobi World War. A common enemy large enough to override every other conflict. 5 nations that had spent generations killing each other stood on the same battlefield without fracturing because the alternative was extinction. The unity wasn't built on trust, or on shared values, or on any of the things Hashirama had tried to build Konoha around. It was built on threat, on fear of something worse than each other. And it worked. Better than anything else had ever worked. Sasuke looked at that and drew the obvious conclusion. The peace that follows a war doesn't come from the war ending. It comes from the threat that caused the war persisting in some form but transformed into something manageable enough to live with, present enough to remember. When the threat disappears entirely, the old tensions come back. The nations remember why they distrusted each other. The alliances that look permanent in the middle of a crisis quietly dissolve. And eventually, something new starts. His proposal was to short-circuit that cycle. Keep the threat alive. Make it him. Unknown quantity, a controllable shadow, something the 5 nations could point at and organize against without having to actually fight. Not peace through understanding. Peace through shared vigilance. The counter-argument, the one Naruto made, is that this kind of peace is hollow. That a world held together by fear of one man is not a world that has actually changed, it's just a world that has found a more sophisticated way to defer its problems. That real peace has to be built from within, through connection, through the hard, slow work of actually learning to trust. It's a beautiful counter-argument. It's also, looking at what followed, not obviously correct. Because Naruto won the argument. And then the world did exactly what Sasuke predicted. The peace after the war was real, for a while. The generation that fought together had shared something that left a mark. But that generation aged. The ones who came after inherited the peace without inheriting the experience that built it. They grew up in stability and learned to take it for granted, which meant they also gradually forgot what the alternative looked like. The criminal organizations came back. New ones, stranger ones, operating at scales the old system wasn't designed to handle. Threats emerged that the hidden village framework already strained by the war had no real answer to. The political tensions between nations didn't vanish, they went underground, mutated, found new expressions. The structural problems Madara had identified, the ones the war had briefly papered over, started showing through again. And Naruto, as Hokage, found himself doing something very close to what Sasuke had proposed just without admitting it. He became the deterrent. The reason large-scale conflict between nations remained irrational was not, in practice, because nations had learned to love each other. It was because everyone understood that escalation would eventually involve Naruto, and that was a calculation nobody wanted to make. Sasuke played the same role from the outside, moving through the shadows, dealing with threats the official structure couldn't acknowledge. The world Naruto built looks different from Sasuke's proposal on the surface. But the underlying architecture is recognizably the same. Peace maintained by the existence of individuals whose power makes conventional warfare obsolete, rather than by any genuine transformation of the conditions that produce conflict. Sasuke proposed being that individual openly, deliberately, as a design system. Naruto became that individual accidentally, through the logic of power outscaling institutions. The outcome was nearly identical. The difference was that Naruto's version had no intentional design, which meant it also had no plan for what happened when Naruto was no longer available. Which is, not coincidentally, exactly when everything started falling apart. There's a deeper layer to Sasuke's thinking that the series never fully explores, and it's the part that makes his proposal genuinely uncomfortable rather than just strategically interesting. Sasuke had been a target his entire life. He knew, from personal experience, what it did to a person to have their existence organized around an enemy. Itachi had made him into a weapon by giving him something to hate. The Uchiha had been made into a threat by a village that feared them. He had watched, from the inside, how communities cohered around their enemies, how the thing you were against was often more unifying than anything you were for. He was proposing to use that mechanism deliberately, to take what had been done to him, to his clan, to dozens of shinobi across generations, and formalize it. Not as an accident of politics or fear, but as a designed feature. A lightning rod. Something that absorbed the world's need to have an enemy and redirected it away from each other. The reason this is uncomfortable is that it's honest about something the more optimistic vision refuses to acknowledge. Human communities, historically, have been remarkably good at finding enemies. When external enemies disappear, internal ones tend to emerge. The energy doesn't go away if it finds a new target. Sasuke was proposing to give it a permanent external target and keep it there. Whether that's cynical or pragmatic depends entirely on what you believe about human nature. And the series, by showing us the Boruto era, makes a quiet argument that Sasuke's anthropology was more accurate than Naruto's, even if his solution remains unacceptable. The thing Naruto's victory actually demonstrated, not the ideological victory, but the literal, physical one, is that individual will can change specific outcomes without changing underlying systems. Naruto reached pain. He reached Obito. He reached Sasuke. Each of those connections was real and mattered. But each of them was also contingent on Naruto specifically being present, being the one who showed up, having exactly the right history with exactly the right person at exactly the right moment. That doesn't scale. It doesn't institutionalize. You can't build a civilization on the premise that the right person will always arrive in time to make the right connection. Sasuke's plan scaled. It was impersonal, systematic, and cruel, but it was designed to function independent of any individual's presence or emotional capacity. It would work whether or not the right person showed up. It would work in 50 years, when everyone who remembered the war was dead. It was ugly precisely because it took human nature as a fixed constraint rather than a variable to be improved. The argument for Sasuke is not that his plan was good. It's that his plan was engineered, and Naruto's wasn't. Naruto bet everything on people choosing better. On the relationships built during the war outlasting the people who built them. On the memory of shared sacrifice transmitting across generations without institutional support. On the cycle actually being breakable through individual acts of connection and forgiveness. Some of that happened. The world after the war was genuinely different from the world before it, for a while, in ways that mattered. But the cycle didn't break. It bent. It changed shape. It found new forms and new actors and new justifications. Everything Sasuke predicted would come back came back, on schedule, exactly as he said it would. He was standing in the rubble of a finished war, looking at a group of exhausted people who wanted very badly to believe they'd solved something, and he was telling them, "You haven't solved anything. You've only paused it. And when it starts again, you won't have this moment, this unity, this specific window where everyone remembers the cost. You'll have inherited peace, which is worth less than peace you had to build, because inherited peace comes without the knowledge of what it cost." He was right about all of it. He was wrong about one thing. He thought the only answer to being right was to act on it unilaterally, to install himself as the solution without asking anyone's permission. That's where he lost Naruto. Not on the analysis, Naruto didn't have a clean rebuttal to the analysis. He lost him on the willingness to treat people as variables in a system rather than as the point of the system. And maybe that distinction matters more than the outcome. Maybe the kind of peace you build says something about what you think people are for. Maybe a peace that depends on one man's self-sacrifice is worth less than a peace that asks something of everyone, even if the second kind is more fragile. Or maybe that's exactly the kind of thing people tell themselves when they don't want to admit that the realistic option was abandoned in favor of a beautiful one. Sasuke walked away. The beautiful option was tried. The world got more complicated, more dangerous, and more unstable, exactly as he predicted. He's out there somewhere, still moving through the shadows, still dealing with what the official structure can't handle, still doing the job he proposed to do openly, just without anyone calling it what it is. Subscribe right now and join our Telegram community. Get the latest anime news, new theories, leaks, and the hottest discussions before anyone else. Link in the description.